Story 39. My wife's secret boyfriend died, and all hell broke loose. I, 32 male, and my ex-wife Michelle, 33 female, worked at the same company. We met, dated for 3 years, then married in Las Vegas with all our friends in attendance. We had a blowout party celebrating the relationship and marriage. The day was crazy, and Michelle chose one of those cheesy Vegas wedding chapels that allowed us to make it into a pretty fun experience. Part of the experience was a prenup service for a minimal cost that we thought was hilarious, but figured, why not? Fast forward a few years and we have a daughter, Chloe, 3 female, who means the world to both of us. Right after Chloe was born, my wife found a new job during maternity leave, working in a different division of our current company, allowing her to work a hybrid between going into the office and working from home a few days a week. This made it easy for us. I could swing working from home 1 day a week from my job and choose one of the days that Michelle was in the office. This helped us be a part of raising Chloe. When Chloe turned 4, we planned a big birthday bash with all of our family members who could attend, and we invited many of Chloe's daycare friends. The party was a huge success, and Chloe had a wonderful day being the center of attention. There was one issue that I had noted during the festivities regarding how Michelle was acting around one of the other daycare dads. We'll call this guy Phil because he was filling an apparent void in my wife's life. Michelle seemed to take a lot of time to ensure Phil and his son were having a good time, and I noticed she spent way more time with him than the other adults. The part that tingled my red flag nerve was that every time I left the room or went off to take care of something, Michelle would beeline directly for Phil. Eventually, I made a few excuses to see if my subconscious was right. Sure enough, as soon as I stepped away or seemed to focus on something else, Michelle was beside Phil, chatting him up. By the night's end, when everyone left for the evening, Michelle could tell I was not in a good mood. As I cleaned up, she kept asking me what was wrong, but I ignored her and kept on task. I wanted to ensure she knew I was unhappy with her and let her figure out the why. A while later, I could see the guilty expression on her face, and I knew she had figured it out. As we were getting ready for bed, she finally told me she was sorry for spending so much time talking to one of the other parents so much. I was waiting for this, so I explained that it seemed there was more to it. She denied it, and then started in on me that I was just being silly and paranoid for no reason. I also told her I thought so until I started testing my theory. As soon as I told her what I had done, she lost her mind and started screaming at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. I waited for her to finish with her tirade and looked into her eyes. When she finally finished, she stood there glaring at me. During her rant, my anger had taken this strange shift into the background, and I was just staring at this woman who was losing it. I calmly, at least that's how I'd like to portray it, told her that she should remember this conversation, because if I ever found out she was doing something she shouldn't be, this would be the conversation that broke us. We slept apart that night, and the next few days were quiet. We rarely spoke, and Michelle was just curt and borderline rude when we did. I adopted this, whatever attitude that probably didn't help. This all changed about a week later when I could tell Michelle was upset that we weren't talking. She eventually came to me one night since I was sleeping on the couch in the office. She got on the couch next to me, held me, and started crying, saying she was sorry for making me feel bad. Finally, she admitted she shouldn't have talked to Phil so much. She said he was a former colleague from the department she worked in while we still worked at the same office. This turned out to be a lie as Phil worked in the new department she moved to. As I said, Michelle was in a different business unit there. Let me just explain that our company had multiple buildings in an office complex. I worked in Building 1, and Michelle worked in Building 3. She went on to tell me that Phil was the one who had given her the name of the daycare we use. She was very affectionate for the next couple of weeks, and things seemed to return to normal as we continued our lives. Michelle and I shared a very active physical love life. We go out together on dates and even meet up with many of our friends regularly. We vacation several times yearly, and no other obvious red flags bothered me. One day, a few months later, when Michelle got home from work, she looked like a total wreck. Her eyes were red and swollen like she had been crying. When I asked her what was wrong, she said that one of her friends from work had been in a car wreck and was in the hospital. I asked who it was, and she just told me it was someone I didn't know but didn't go into any detail. I didn't think anything of it and tried to comfort her, but she was standoffish and told me she needed some time. She went to bed after picking at the dinner I had made. I checked on her a few times and found her sobbing in the bathroom once. She eventually fell asleep, Chloe happened to be at my parents' house for a weekend with her grandparents. The next morning was a Saturday, and we both had the weekends off, so it was our time. When Michelle woke up, she was on her phone most of the morning. I asked her what was happening, and she told me she was trying to get updates about her friend from a group of coworkers. Around lunchtime, someone rang our doorbell, and Michelle opened the door. Two people stood there, a couple we knew from work that we would regularly hang out with. We'll call them Jen and Alan. We were all pretty good friends, and Alan and I even hunted together a few times a year. Both work for my company in the HR department. Jen had been a key ally in Michelle's recent promotion. Jen took Michelle's hand and led her outside. That piqued my interest as I stood and walked to the door to say hi. They were standing in the front yard with their heads together, and Michelle was sobbing uncontrollably. Jen put her arms around Michelle and tried to console her. I looked at Alan, and he avoided my gaze. I asked him what was wrong, and he simply said that they had come to tell Michelle that one of their coworkers had died from injuries in a car accident. I immediately started to walk to my wife when Alan reached out and stopped me. I turned to look at him, and he had this really sad look on his face and simply told me that I should let Jen handle it. I pulled my arm away, walked over to where the ladies were standing, and reached out to my wife to comfort her. She literally jerked herself away from my touch and fell to her knees, bawling. I turned to Jen and asked her what was going on. Jen took a deep breath, faced me, and said that the friend who had died was a coworker named Phil, and that he and Michelle were good friends. This hit me like a truck. I looked back at Jen and asked, how good of friends were they? Jen got this embarrassed look and said that Michelle would need to explain. I knew instantly that Phil and Michelle were in a relationship. I looked between Jen and Alan and asked them if they knew about the relationship. Alan looked away, and Jen just nodded. Jen stepped back from me, and I'm assuming it was because of the look on my face. I turned and looked at Alan and said, so you call yourself my friend, and you knew my wife was cheating on me? Alan stood there looking at the ground, and Jen started to tear up but didn't respond. I asked them how long the relationship had been going on, completely blocking out my wife sobbing in the yard next to us. Jen said that it had been going on for a few months. I stood there with my mind on fire. I couldn't even think straight. I was standing in my yard with two people I thought were my real friends and my wife sobbing on her knees about the affair partner's death. I cannot even describe how angry I was. As I said, my mind was on fire, and I couldn't control my emotions. I looked at Alan and Jen and said, you are not welcome here. Get the F off my property and never come back. They hesitated, and I squared off with Alan and told him to leave now, or we'd fight. Alan took Jen by the arm and started pulling her to the car. Jen was now crying, saying she was sorry and needed to be there for Michelle. Michelle had gotten enough of her mind under control to realize that her cheating relationship had been exposed, and she stood up, staring at me in horror, still crying. I controlled myself enough to demand they take Michelle with them, but they needed to get off my property. I walked back into the house and slammed the door hard enough to damage the door frame. I noticed this because I had to yank on the door to get it positioned for the deadbolt to engage. Michelle started pounding on the door, begging me to let her in, but I ignored her, walked around to the other doors, and locked them too. She didn't have her keys, so she couldn't get in. It took a while, but eventually Jen and Alan left with Michelle. I called my mom and told her that Michelle and I had just broken up because she was cheating on me. When I explained what happened, my mom was in tears on the phone. I told her not to let Michelle take Chloe from them and to call me if she showed up. My mom said that they would take Chloe out for the day to avoid Michelle. I sat there on the couch for hours thinking about everything. My mind was racing, and it seemed like I bounded from crazy thoughts to ice-cold fury about getting revenge on my wife. It must have been a few hours until I could sort out my next steps. I looked at my phone, and there were a few messages and a dozen texts from Alan and Jen. I deleted them without reading the contents and then blocked both numbers. I dug in the closet that night until I found the box with our important papers. This box was where we put our passports, SSI cards, etc. It also had our marriage certificate, and paper-clipped to that was the prenup we had signed. I hadn't given it much thought since it was a boilerplate that said everyone gets to keep anything they brought into the marriage and split all assets and bank accounts by contribution percentage. It stated neither party could collect money from the other's retirement accounts. It also said that any personal debt would be held by that person, like credit cards or car loans. The last couple of line items clearly said the relationship would terminate without alimony, and child custody would be 50/50ths, with child-related expenses being split evenly, except in the case of infidelity. It stipulated that primary custody would go in favor of the non-cheating partner. Leave it to Vegas to save your butt. I took that document along with the house and car title since I had purchased the house before getting married. Michelle had moved into my house from her apartment. My mom called me to let me know that Michelle and one of her friends had shown up at the house and demanded to have Chloe through the Ring doorbell. Then she told me she would drop Chloe off at my place because Michelle threatened to call the police. They showed up a while later and I put Chloe to bed. My mom and dad hung out with me for a few hours and we discussed what I planned on doing. The fact that Michelle was in a full-blown affair with a guy from her work made it clear that the marriage was essentially over. I told my parents I'd get a lawyer next week and start the divorce process. I didn't allow Michelle back in the house over the weekend, but I did allow her to talk to Chloe on the phone. Michelle demanded to see our daughter, and I told her she would only be allowed back after I had my affairs in order. She demanded to know what that meant, but I ignored her and hung up. The following week, I was able to get to see a lawyer. I just called the best law firms in my area until I found one that would be able to meet with me later in the week. I took the prenup and a copy of the Ring doorbell video captured when Jen and Alan came to tell Michelle about Phil's death. The lawyer quickly reviewed the video and the prenup, laughing at the boilerplate format. When I asked him about the doc, he said it would be fine for what we needed for our purposes. He asked me a bunch of questions, writing down my answers. Some of the data he requested would require me to go to the bank to get info on our accounts. It took a couple more visits and another week for them to complete the paperwork. The law office used a preferred company to serve the paperwork, and it was easy enough for them to find her at work. Our company is made up of multiple business units on an open campus. Michelle was served outside of her office as she walked out of the building for lunch with other friends. Jen and Alan were among them. I was told the guy from the company approached her and asked if she was full legal name, and Michelle said yes. He then presented the envelope and told her she had been served. I had asked one of my friends to meet up with the guys serving the papers to point out my wife. I was told between them that Michelle was stunned to be served, and she fainted or at least collapsed after opening the envelope. A cover letter encouraged Michelle to seek counsel and have them contact my lawyer to work out child visitation and discuss the logistics of getting the paperwork signed and submitted. It took another 2 weeks before Michelle's lawyer contacted my lawyer. They hammered out a fair visitation schedule and a meeting between them. I suggested that we use my parents as a handoff solution. Michelle agreed to the visitation agreement that allowed us to have her for 3 days, then hand off to the other for 3 days, etc. Michelle and I both adhered to the visitation agreement and never had to interact with each other. I did work with her through our lawyers to allow her into the house to get her personal stuff out of the home. At first, she was just going to get some clothes and the basics from the master bathroom, but my lawyer insisted that she make a list of items she wanted, and we'd get that moved out of the home to wherever she wanted. I stayed away and had my dad there to be in the house while Michelle was collecting her things. This awakened Michelle as it started hitting home to her that she was being forced to move out of the house. Our legal teams reviewed the prenup and agreed on the details and timing. One of the things that caused a stir was that Michelle was using our shared bank account to pay for an extended stay room. The lawyers had to agree to a date to identify when our finances were shared against separated. It took another few weeks to work through all the details, and Michelle and her lawyers were dragging their collective feet trying to get me into marriage counseling. I adamantly refused to go since this was not something we could work through with a counselor. She made a conscious decision to step outside of our marriage. Our divorce paperwork was signed and filed with the courts about 5 weeks after the day AP died. The kicker to this was that Michelle had tried to attend his funeral, and a fight ensued because Phil had a fiancée. Phil's parents were shocked and furious that my wife had shown up for the funeral and had asked her to leave. Somebody had the temerity to tell his fiancée about the affair. Want to guess who? The next time I saw Michelle was during the final court date. This final meeting with the judge was held in an office and included 3 people from the court, my lawyer, Michelle, and her lawyer. The proceedings answered some basic questions about the agreement. The judge looked through the paperwork and smiled when he got to the prenup with the name of the wedding chapel and Vegas logo on the top. It only took about 30 minutes, and he signed the final divorce decree. We got up, and as I walked out of the office, Michelle asked me if we could talk. I told her I would give her 5 minutes, and we stepped aside. Our lawyers waited out of earshot, chatting quietly and looking at their phones. Michelle stood before me with tears running down her face as she looked me in the eyes. She told me she was sorry for everything and took full responsibility for her actions. She asked if we could remain in contact for our daughter's sake. For the first time, I shed tears. I told her that I didn't think that was a good idea because I still loved her and didn't think I'd be able to face her while trying to move on. When I told her I still loved her, she broke down in the hallway crying, causing our lawyers to come over and ensure she was okay. I walked out as her lawyer tried to calm her. Michelle and I continued to co-parent Chloe over the next 6 years. We would talk on the phone when needed, but we never met. Michelle would send me birthday and holiday e-cards. One year she sent me a Valentine's card, so I asked her not to do that as I was seeing someone. She had heard of my new partner through Chloe, and I think it pushed one of her buttons. That was the only card I received from her that was inappropriate. I did remarry, and my wife gave me another daughter, Ginny, 2 years to the day on our second wedding anniversary. My new wife, Brittany, 40 female, was diagnosed with cancer the year after our baby was born. Brittany lived to see her turn 3 and passed away within a month of her birthday. I had found love again, which was taken from me a second time. Through some mutual friends, I know that Michelle never dated seriously since our divorce. I'm unsure if it was the divorce or the loss of AP. Maybe both, I never asked. When Brittany died, Michelle insisted on stepping in to help out with Ginny since she was Chloe's little sister. She even took both girls and got them ready for the funeral and kept them occupied during the service. I was as busy as any widowed husband could be with family and friends there mourning Britt's death. Michelle attended the funeral and sat with the girls most of the time, keeping to the background. My parents knew she was there and did speak to her so she wouldn't feel alone. I thanked her for helping watch the kids, and she said she was happy to do it. She said she was sorry about Britt and offered to watch Ginny anytime since Chloe adored her. Michelle is back in my life, for better or worse. She's been amazing, helping with everything 2 little girls need that a father can't help with. Michelle rented a small house about half a mile from my house, and I've helped her do some basic stuff like painting and heavy lifting. The girls go back and forth between the houses like it's normal. Michelle and I no longer have a schedule for Chloe. We just let her go wherever she wants. Chloe spends time with Michelle because she's getting to that point where it's more natural to hang out with her mom, but she spends time with me because she wants to see me and spend time with Ginny. Michelle has stepped into the mother role for Ginny, and it's been heartwarming to see her finally get past the loss of Britt. Ginny still remembers her mom, and I talked to her about Britt, including showing her pictures and video. I won't let Ginny ever forget her mother, but I won't stop her from forming a bond with Michelle. Girls need moms like boys need dads. I should address Michelle's situation. A year after Britt's passing, we have not seen each other in any regular capacity. I do admit that there have been times when we have spent the night together recently. We have finally found a way to co-parent comfortably. A sort of loose organic family unit has grown between us, and Michelle has even spent the night a few times. Chloe is always happy to wake up and see her mom in the kitchen wearing my pajamas. I've internally set expectations that Michelle will eventually find someone and move on. I will never marry her again. That's not what this relationship is. I have forgiven her as she's the mother of my daughter. I still love her in that capacity, but I can't ever see myself being able to trust her enough to commit again. I'm not stupid enough to think that Michelle sees things like I do. Every morning, she's there making breakfast or helping get the kids ready for school and daycare. She has that smile on her face. Michelle was always a great mom but had some issues being a great wife. We'll see how things look when the rental agreement on Michelle's house expires. To tie up some loose ends with Jen and Alan, I was scolded about having Michelle served while at work, but the company didn't have any grounds to punish me because they were actually out in the courtyard, which is the property of the management company. I filed a lawsuit back at the company for retaliation because Alan and Jen were in the HR department and helped to foster the relationship between my wife and her former coworker. When they tried to get me in trouble, that was the second mistake. My lawsuit with our company was settled out of court when we filed a petition for email and Slack records of everyone in HR to review communications between Jen Allen, my wife, and her AP. When the legal team from my employer went through the communications, they quickly settled. The settlement was generous, and Jen was terminated from the company. Alan was allowed to stay at the company but was passed up for a promotion for a role he was already filling in for. I also filed a suit against Jen and Alan personally, which was also settled out of court. It wasn't for a lot of money, but I know it stung. I'm living the best life I can right now, and I'm fully focused on raising my 2 daughters.
I only post new and unique content. Please like and subscribe.